we've all heard about some type of breach over the past year. And the interesting thing about this graphic, so if we look at 2014, halfway through the year, we were there about 400 breaches, which is, if you think about that, if we do that many for the rest of the year, we would have surpassed any of these other years with respect to breaches. And all this does is really ring home the fact that we are becoming more technology aware. We are trusting more maybe on the cloud where there are servers, and that in and of itself lends it opportunity for the hackers to start trying to hack those servers and get data. So that's why I like to start with this slide again, just to kind of bring home the fact that these breaches are occurring and their speed at which they're occurring is increasing as we become more technology aware. I'm going to build out this next slide. It really talks about the auditing aspect with respect to the life cycle of a server. So what do I mean by that? Well, when we bring a server into the environment or we get one stood up out in the cloud, there's really several different aspects that occur. So that first one obviously is provisioning, getting the right operating system on it. The next piece may be doing some patching, but as we get through that first initial stage, kind of that ongoing management that we're going to need to do for that server is the auditing aspect. And what you'll see depicted here, several governing bodies, so you'll notice the regulatory compliance, security compliance, and really depending on your vertical or the area that you're responsible for, one or more of these compliance may be in play for you. So by way of an example, the HIPAA, if you're not in health, the health agency, healthcare, then that one won't be in play. But if you have servers that are stood up on the internet facing, then potentially the DISA, Defense Information, or the CIS, the Center for Internet Security, those compliance rules are going to be in play for you. And really what it is, it ends up being a set of rules, almost a template. Like if you're going to have a server and it's going to be internet facing, here are some rules or settings that need to be in play. And what I've seen is a lot of customers use that template as a good baseline. They may add some additional rules to that server to lock it down, but essentially what we're trying to do is make sure that it doesn't have any holes that can be breached, again, by these hackers that are trying to get into those servers and get that confidential data. The next bullet talks about the patching, and again, depending on my operating system, so Windows, we're all familiar with the Patch Tuesday, so patches getting released for the operating system on some frequency is in play, which is going to be separate from that regulatory, that security compliance. So again, just another aspect that I need to do to make sure that my server is meeting a certain set of standards. The last one there is operational compliance, and I'll utilize a very trivial example here, but when I stand a server up, there may be local users, local groups on that machine, and I as an administrator may want to ensure that the local groups doesn't expand beyond, or the local users doesn't expand beyond what I set forth when I stood that server up. So I don't have the rogue administrator making backdoors into the servers. So I can set up an operational compliance, put that as a rule, and then audit against that to make sure that that server stays the way that I set it out when we first set it up. So again, eliminating any holes or backdoors into the servers. That's kind of what we say when we're talking about the auditing. It does fit into the life cycle of a server, but it's only one aspect. There are many others. Okay, so this is an interesting slide because we talk about what are the server management challenges that may be apparent to an IT department. So you'll see their cost, risk, performance, growth. I'll let you read through those, and as you're reading, I'll just bring up a quick example. So internally, I work as a pre-sales consultant. And some of my job duties are demonstrating the software. Well, at RightStar, there are many different solutions from BMC that I may have to present at any given time, but I rely on my IT staff to stand that server up for me. But what they've done to kind of mitigate any risk and performance and grow to the speed that I need is they've made like a catalog so I can go out there and request a particular server, how much RAM, how much disk space I need on it, and then they are standing it up. And for that sense, then it's going to maintain a certain compliance all the way through. Now, there are some additional aspects that they would need to do that's outside of my realm, like the auditing that I just mentioned with respect to those compliance features, and of course doing the patching on that. But from a growing and the performance challenges that you see here, we pretty much got that taken care of. And if we were to engage our IT in the back, they may be able to talk about how they're mitigating some of these risks. So again, those are just some of the challenges. Yours may be more, it may be less, but just some things when I'm starting to stand up these servers that I'll be challenged with and I'm going to have to come up with some answers for. Okay, so some of the difficulties. Now this is an interesting slide to me as well because it kind of rings home the fact. When I'm doing server management, unlike my desktops, I have many operating systems that could be in play. So by way of an example, the Windows server may be really good if we've opted for Exchange. Works really good on that. It's the back end, etc. But if we have a web server that we need to stand up and I haven't opted for IIS, then maybe I'm going to run that on Linux. So now I've just introduced two different operating systems in the environment. I have a set of administrators that needs to perform these functions that you see at the top. So someone's going to have to put the OS down. We're going to have to, once we lay that down, do the patching to make sure we have the latest patches installed. We may need to distribute software. Again, those are all the configuration aspects. And then we also have the compliance. So on a day-to-day basis, I may want to gather some inventory to see where we stand, hardware, software perspective. I may need to do audits. I may need to check vulnerability assessments. When I have different tools in my environment for the different operating systems, it becomes very disjointed. Each of these has its own back-end database, and they don't necessarily talk together. So it becomes a challenge when we start talking about doing configuration management of the servers. BMC solves this solution with their automation suite by really unifying the two. So I have one tool that can be leveraged across multiple operating systems. So that same tool that I'm going to use to deploy software to a Windows machine is the same tool that I can use to deploy the software to a Linux box. So I don't end up with a hodgepodge of tools. I have one tool that manages my whole server platform. And when I need to do configuration management, it ties very closely with my compliance assurance, again, because it's one database on the back end. So it really talks about unifying the two. Capabilities. So that disjointed architecture, you may have noticed several different functions. Understand that the BladeLogic suite is able to perform all those functions, so from the provisioning to the patching, the software deployment, any configuration changes that I need to do, delivering software, that all falls under the umbrella of server management. But today we're going to focus in on just the compliance piece. But again, understand all those capabilities make up that whole suite. We're just slicing one piece of the pie for our discussion today. Okay, which brings me to the last slide before we get into the demonstration. And so here, I mean, we kind of saw it on that initial slide, but if we focus in just on 2014, and you can kind of see here on the left the months, as the months have gone by for 2014, we've seen a variety of different breaches occurring. And so, Mike, I would ask you, how is BMC addressing these breaches that come up every month with respect to server management?
Yeah, that's a great question, Stacy. As we've seen just the number of breaches coming out, not even just the ones that are being released from the perspective of cardholder data being compromised or customer information or PIAA on the HIPAA front, but also just the large number of vulnerabilities that are being released like Poodle, Shell Shock, and Heartbleed, all of which have the official names like the OpenSSL vulnerability, et cetera. Now, what BMC has done is to really focus on releasing content very quickly after the public release of these vulnerabilities is announced to allow our customers to take immediate action across those servers that they may have, whether they're forward-facing or in the back-end data centers, to ensure that you're able to not only find any of those issues that may exist in your data center, effectively find where you may be vulnerable, either on the front or the back end, and ultimately remediate those servers so that you can say at the end of the day, possibly before it hits CNN, as to new breach discovered or new vulnerability discovered that hasn't been taken advantage of yet, that you've already fixed it. So again, just by releasing those on a very quick basis, and also allowing customers to build their own in the cases where they may need to respond to something internally that is not even public facing, will allow you to do that on top of all of the ongoing configuration change management, patch management, and compliance issues that the product will be taking care of for you. So I think on that, Stacy, if you want to go ahead and take it away.
Here, I'm just going to go into the BladeLogic interface. And so, Mike, if you could just confirm for me that you can see my BladeLogic portal.
Yep, everything's up on the screen.
Okay, perfect. So what I've done is log into the BladeLogic portal. Let me just make sure I didn't get timed out. And I did, so let me get logged back in. So what I'm doing is logging into the BladeLogic portal. And this is my interface really into doing any of the management of my servers. And so what I'll start off in is the actual Poodle vulnerability, again, that was released a few months back. And so a couple things here. I'm going to go ahead and click the Poodle name itself. I'm going to show you kind of the output, and then what I'll do is step back into the FAT client, that Windows client that I have running, so that you can see how that's imported in. Okay, so what we have here is really a couple of runs that have occurred. So what you'll see at the very beginning is this Poodle is kind of like a compliance check, was run against 5 servers. And when I first ran it, you can see I had 0 compliance. So all of them basically had this vulnerability. And so that's one of the nice things that Mike alluded to. They released that Poodle zip kit. I simply import it into my console, and I can immediately run that against my servers and see, for example, who's vulnerable. So the next thing I did was to go ahead and apply the remediation package just to one server. And you can see where my compliance went from 0% now up to 20%. Again, one of the servers, kind of follow your cursor here, one of the servers had that fix applied, so now I'm somewhat compliant, but again, not totally. As I scroll down a little bit more, thinking about it from a table perspective, I can see quickly the first run here, 0 all the way across the board. As we start to apply a fix, I can see that we're gaining some compliance. Okay, I'm going to back this up. I'm going to go back to the home screen. And what we'll see again on that Poodle, I clicked here on the name, but I have the ability to look at some results. So I'm going to go ahead and look at that. The data is a little bit different, saying the same thing, but you'll notice a different graphic here. So I'm able to see 80% of the machines non-compliant, 20% that are. But the additional thing that I'm able to see here is really where am I out of compliance. And if you're not familiar with that Poodle vulnerability that came, it was basically SSL3 being enabled. So what we've done is gone out across those 5 machines. So you can see here my results, my targets across those 5 machines to see who had it enabled. And so now at this point, because I've deployed it to one, I've got one machine that has it disabled, and the rest, again, are enabled. Okay, so here I'm going to go back to the home screen. And from a zip kit perspective, I really like those, again, because it takes really a lot of the onus off of me as an end user. I can simply import it into my console and then check my vulnerability or my compliance. And so what I'm going to do now is quickly just go into the BladeLogic console. And what you'll notice seated inside of this console, the various regulatory and security compliance that I mentioned in the PowerPoint.